I still remember the first time I walked into an emergency room. The sound of cardiac monitors, the smell of disinfectant, and that chill that seems to come not only from the air conditioning, but from fear itself, the fear of losing someone. Since then, more than 20 years have passed. Today, when I walk through the hospital corridors, I realize that every wall holds stories that will never be forgotten. Stories that science tries to explain, but that the heart understands in a different way. My name is Dr. Rafael Moreira. I'm an intensive care physician, specialized in critical care and hospital emergencies. I've spent most of my life inside intensive care units, places where life and death meet with unsettling frequency. In there, there's no room for distraction. Every second matters. Every decision can be the difference between a last breath and a new chance. Over the years, I've learned to respect both the power of medicine and the mysteries that escape it. Science taught me how to diagnose, treat, and save. But it was my patience and the moments that defied all logic who taught me to see something even greater. There are forces at work that reason cannot reach. I receive many messages from people who want to understand what goes through a doctor's mind when he witnesses something that defies everything he's learned. The truth is that even after so many years, I'm still trying to understand it myself. And maybe that's what keeps my faith alive, both in medicine and, paradoxically, in the unexplainable. This channel was born out of that very desire to share the stories I've lived and witnessed, stories that don't fit into scientific articles but have left deep marks on the souls of those who were there. Stories that show that even in the places where hope seems to die, something greater can still happen. Don't expect to find only diagnoses and reports here. What you're about to hear are true accounts, lived among machines, silent prayers, and eyes that plead for a miracle. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm here to tell you what I saw and what I could never forget. And before we begin this story, I want you to know this. Behind every scalpel, every tube, every medical decision, there is a human being who also feels fear, doubt, and sometimes a shiver that doesn't come from the cold, but from the sensation of standing before something that goes beyond science. Today's story is one of the most striking of my career. It began with a sentence that echoed through the hospital halls and that I've never been able to erase from my memory. Doctor, it's useless to continue. At that moment, I didn't know it yet, but I was about to witness something that would completely change the way I saw life and the unexplainable. The first thing they told me that night was, "Doctor, it's useless to continue." Those words echoed inside me like a blunt strike. I had heard similar phrases before, whispered in quiet corridors by exhausted professionals when hope seemed to have left the room. But for some reason, in that instant, something inside me refused to accept it. I looked at that motionless body on the gurney, surrounded by tubes, cables, and monitors that now showed almost nothing. The heart, once irregular, was now only a flat, cold, merciless line. The clock read 3:12 a.m. It was the kind of hour when the soul feels most vulnerable, when physical exhaustion and the weight of loss become almost unbearable. And there, between the constant sound of alarms and the resigned looks of the team, something told me not to give up. It was an inner whisper, almost inaudible but impossible to ignore. Before continuing this story, I need to ask you for something. Leave your comment right now saying, "I believe in miracles." That's important not only for the algorithm, which helps YouTube deliver this video to more people, but also because every comment is like a seed of faith planted in the middle of the storm. And believe me, what you're about to hear next might shake everything you think you know about life and death. Take a deep breath. Imagine the scene, an almost empty emergency room, the biting cold of the air, and the feeling that time has stopped. The patient's body lay still, and the team around him had already begun to put away the instruments. The protocol had been followed to the letter. There was nothing else to do, at least that's what everyone believed. But Medicine isn't made only of protocols, it's made of instinct, compassion, and sometimes something we simply can't explain. While everyone else stepped away, I stood still, watching. Something about that man told me his story wasn't over yet. It was as if an invisible part of him was still fighting, asking for one more second, one more try, one more chance. At that moment, everything around me disappeared. I could no longer hear the footsteps in the hallway or the sound of machines being turned off. There was only me, him, and that deafening silence. That's when, without thinking, I made a decision that went against every recommendation. I restarted the resuscitation maneuvers. And that's when I noticed something strange. As my hands pressed down on that man's chest, a sensation ran through my body. A shiver, a sudden warmth, as if something was happening there beyond what reason could comprehend. The nurse looked at me, surprised, almost with pity. "Doctor, it's been more than 20 minutes." I didn't answer. I kept going. Each compression was a silent prayer, an act of stubbornness and faith. And then something changed. The monitor, which had remained static, emitted a short sound. The flat line began to flicker. One heartbeat, then another. The entire room froze. "This isn't possible," someone murmured. But it was. From that moment on, the atmosphere shifted completely. No one could explain what was happening, but everyone could feel it. The man who had been declared lifeless minutes earlier had begun to breathe again. And that's where the most unexplainable part of this story begins. An event that no report, exam, or medical record could ever accurately describe. One of those rare moments when the impossible simply happens. Before we go on, I want you to promise me something. Stay until the end of this video. Because what I'm about to tell you now isn't just about medicine. It's about the invisible force that keeps life going, even when the whole world has already given up. His name was João Batista, a 62-year-old retired truck driver used to spending long nights alone on the roads of the countryside. He was known among his colleagues as João do Café because he wouldn't start the day without drinking 3 cups in a row. A simple man with calloused hands and a calm voice who used to say, "As long as the heart beats, we keep moving." When he arrived at the hospital, he wasn't the same anymore. His tired body carried the marks of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and rushed meals. His wife, Mrs. Helena, stood beside him, holding her husband's hand tightly, as if trying to hold on to life itself. I remember her look, not one of despair, but of faith, a look that said, "I know he's coming back." And somehow that made me hesitate before even knowing his full clinical picture. João had suffered a massive heart attack in his sleep. The emergency service brought him in unconscious. According to the paramedics, he had gone into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital and only came back for brief moments after the first resuscitation. By the time he reached us, his heart barely reacted to stimulation. In the emergency room, the team acted with precision. Adrenaline, defibrillation, mechanical ventilation, everything was done strictly by the book. Nearly 20 minutes of non-stop maneuvers, no significant response. The clock kept moving relentlessly. With each second, the chances diminished. I could see in the nurses' eyes the same expression I'd witnessed so many times before, resignation. But when I looked at Helena, I saw something different. She didn't take her eyes off her husband for even a second. She was murmuring something under her breath, a kind of repeated prayer, almost a mantra. Her lips moved subtly, but the strength of it was tangible. "Doctor, please, just a little longer," she said, her voice trembling. "He's always been strong. He always comes back." I had seen a lot in medicine. Men and women who fought until their very last heartbeat. But there was something about João that caught my attention from the start. Even with his exhausted body, there was a slight contraction in his fingers, a minimal movement of his eyelids, almost imperceptible, but real. In that moment, I faced a dilemma every doctor dreads. Reason said, "Stop, it's time to accept." But the heart whispered, "Not yet." That's when I heard that phrase again, the one that would forever mark my memory. "Doctor, it's useless to continue." The colleague beside me said it in a tired voice. "It's been over 25 minutes. Even if he comes back, the chances of consciousness are nearly zero." I knew that. I knew the statistics, the numbers, the limits. But sometimes medicine becomes a battlefield between what we know and what we feel. I looked at Joan's still body. His skin was starting to lose its natural tone. The monitor remained silent, and yet something inside me screamed that it wasn't over. Meanwhile, Helena was quietly crying, her head bowed, never letting go of his hand. That's when she said something I'll never forget. He promised he'd never leave me alone. Not even God would let it end like this. Those words echoed inside me like an electric current. It wasn't just love, it was a force that surpassed any logical explanation. At that moment, I realized that this case wouldn't become just another number in a medical file. That night would be different, and I was about to find out why. The emergency room was immersed in a heavy silence, the kind of silence that comes before the end. The team had done everything science allowed. The maneuvers had ceased, the defibrillator was already set aside, covered with a blue cloth, and the nurse's eyes drifted away from the monitor, as if looking at that flat line was too painful. The clock read 3:36 a.m., 27 minutes since the first collapse. Joan's chart lay open on the counter, and the sound of paper flipping seemed to echo through the cold air of the night. I was supposed, as the protocol dictates, to record the exact time of death. It's one of the hardest parts of the job, to turn an entire life into a number, a record, a line in a medical chart. But something stopped me from picking up the pen. I don't know if it was Helena's gaze, frozen beside the stretcher, or that inner whisper that sometimes blends with medical intuition. The fact is, I couldn't write. My colleague looked at me and said, "Raphael, it's over. We did everything we could." And in that moment I realized he was right, at least according to the laws of medicine. Joan's pupils were fixed, his pulse non-existent, his oxygen levels zero. Everything pointed to the end. But medicine, with all its precision, sometimes fails at one crucial point. The unexplainable doesn't fit into charts. Helena, her eyes filled with tears, still held her husband's hand tightly. "Doctor, he knows you're still here." There was a moment when I wanted to say something comforting, but I couldn't find the words. And it was at that exact moment that I felt, right there, at my fingertips, a faint warmth, an almost imperceptible touch. I looked at the monitor. Nothing, but that warmth persisted. It could have been the air conditioning, or maybe my own mind trying to cling to something, but I know the feeling of the cold skin of death, and that was different. "Prepare the defibrillator," I murmured. The nurse looked at me, startled. "Doctor, are you going to try again?" "Yes." She hesitated for a second, but complied. The team exchanged discreet glances, not of disapproval, but of fatigue. They had seen doctors try too hard before, and most of the time the ending was the same. The shock was delivered. Joan's body jerked, motionless, no response. Once more, nothing. Helena began to cry, but it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a mixture of pain and faith. She kept repeating softly, almost whispering, "I know he's coming back. I know." And then, just as I was about to stop again, something happened, a sound, subtle but clear. The monitor emitted a small beep. The nurse's eyes widened. "Doctor, did you see that?" Before I could answer, there was another sound, then another, and the flat line began to move. One heartbeat, two, three. The monitor now showed a faint, irregular rhythm, but it was alive. "Blood pressure now!" I shouted. 70 over 40, doctor," the resident replied. "Continue compressions, ventilation, at 100%. The room, once silent, filled again with voices, life, movement. It was as if the entire room was breathing with him. Adrenaline was administered once more. The heart responded, weakly, but it responded. The lungs began to expand regularly, And that's when I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. João, who just minutes earlier had been a lifeless body, moved the fingers of his right hand. It wasn't a spasm, it was a conscious movement, slow, deliberate, as if he were trying to touch the world again. The entire team froze. The nurse began to cry. The resident, his voice trembling, whispered, This isn't possible." But it was. The impossible was happening right before our eyes. And in that moment I understood. We were witnessing something that no statistic could ever describe. For an instant, no one knew what to do. Time seemed to stand still, and every gaze in that room was lost somewhere between fear and disbelief. The monitor kept flickering, showing weak, irregular beats, but real ones. That body, which minutes earlier had been nothing more than a memory, was now breathing again. The nurse held back her tears, trying to steady her trembling hands. The resident couldn't take his eyes off the monitor. Even I felt my own heart racing, not from adrenaline, but from something that went far beyond reason. It was as if life itself had refused to leave. "He's back, doctor," Helena said, half crying, half laughing, still clutching her husband's hand. And for the first time that night, I felt that the impossible had crossed into the realm of the real. We re-established mechanical ventilation and stabilized the vital signs. The body that had been pale and cold began to regain color. The heart maintained a slow but steady rhythm. Every new beep from the monitor was a reminder that something extraordinary had taken place there. As we adjusted the ventilator parameters, I noticed something even stranger. João began to move his head slightly, as if trying to wake from a deep sleep. The resident looked at me in shock. "Doctor, is that spontaneous motor activity?" I nodded, though the truth was I didn't have an answer. According to science, after more than 30 minutes of cardiac arrest without proper oxygenation, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. But what I was seeing defied every textbook, every protocol. Helena stepped closer and, crying, leaned her forehead against his. "I knew it, João. I knew you'd come back." And then came the second impossible moment. His lips moved, slightly, as if trying to form a word. I leaned in, incredulous, and I heard, in a faint, almost inaudible voice, a whisper, "I heard you." That was enough to silence the entire room once more. None of us knew what to say. I looked at the vital signs. Stable, heart rate normalizing, blood pressure recovering. He was conscious. Hours later, already in the ICU, João woke up completely. His gaze, calm and fixed on the ceiling, carried a kind of peace that's hard to describe. I approached, trying to comprehend the impossible. "João, can you hear me?" "Yes, doctor," he replied, his voice weak but firm. Helena cried beside the bed, unable to believe what she was seeing. And then he said something I'll never forget. "I saw everything, doctor. I heard you saying it was useless to continue. I was there, but I couldn't come back." Her voice, he pointed to his wife. It was what pulled me back. It was like a light opened when she spoke. At that moment, the coldness of the ICU seemed to disappear. None of us could explain what had happened. The exams showed a heart in recovery, no neurological damage, no sign of brain injury, something that, statistically, was almost impossible. In the days that followed, João improved remarkably. He walked, ate, smiled. Colleagues and family members came to visit him as if they were standing before a living miracle. But the most astonishing part was what he told me later, in private. Once he was back in his hospital room, "Doctor, I saw a corridor, a very long one. At the end there was a bright light, but not like the lights here. It was warm, peaceful, and when I heard my wife's voice saying I would come back, everything went dark, and suddenly I felt the air entering my chest again. I stayed silent, not because I doubted him, but because there was nothing to say. Even after so many years, I've witnessed things that defy logic, but never anything as clear as that. Science explains electrical impulses, chemical discharges, physiological reactions, but it doesn't explain what makes a heart decide to beat again when everything else is gone. As he spoke, I noticed Helena just smiling, gently caressing her husband's hand. Neither of them needed explanations. They had lived the impossible, and I had merely witnessed it. The next morning, when I returned to the ICU, the corridor felt different. The same hospital, the same walls, the same sound of cardiac monitors and hurried footsteps, yet something had changed. Maybe it was me. You can't go through something like that and remain the same. I entered Joan's room quietly. He was sleeping peacefully, breathing with light oxygen support. Beside him, Helena, exhausted, kept her fingers intertwined with his, as if still afraid to lose him. The sunlight streamed through the window, touching the white sheets, and for a moment, everything felt suspended. I stood there watching, trying to understand what had really happened. Medicine had taught me that every phenomenon has a measurable cause, that every heartbeat, every electrical impulse can be explained. But that night, something had gone far beyond any logic I knew. For years, I had treated miracles as biological coincidences, rare statistical anomalies. But when you see a body come back to life after 30 minutes of absolute silence, it's impossible to stay the same. I spent much of that shift trying to find a plausible explanation. I reviewed the exams, the reports, the parameters. No errors, no delays. Everything had followed protocol. And yet, his heart simply decided to beat again. But the most impressive part wasn't the return itself. It was the timing, the exact moment. The first heartbeat coincided with Helena's words. She said, "You're not leaving me. I still need you." And seconds later, the monitor beeped. In medicine, we call that an emotional coincidence. But how do you measure something that happens between two souls? How do you quantify the power of a love that somehow was heard from the other side of silence? I looked at that couple and understood that the human body is only part of the equation. There is something that connects us, something invisible, something no machine can record. That case reminded me of all the patients I had lost throughout my career, of how many times I'd signed a death certificate not knowing if, at that very moment, something else was happening beyond what I could. You see, and I asked myself, do we sometimes give up too soon? How many times does "it's useless to continue" simply mean I'm afraid to keep hoping? The truth is, as doctors, we learn to live with limits, but human beings sometimes go beyond them. And Joan was one of those cases that challenged the very concept of an ending. Some colleagues tried to convince me that it had been a residual electrical discharge, a delayed neurological stimulus, anything that could explain the improbable. But when I looked into Joan's eyes days later, I realized that he knew it too. There was no explanation. He hadn't come back because the right medication was given. He came back because someone called him with enough strength to cross what separates the body from the soul. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, you who are listening right now. Science saves lives every day, and I believe deeply in it. But there are moments, rare, mysterious, indescribable, when something greater acts through us. I don't know what to call it. Some call it a miracle, others faith. I simply call it life. And if there's one lesson I learned that night, it's this. As long as there is love, as long as there is a voice saying keep going, the story is never truly over. Joan stayed in the hospital for just over 2 weeks. They were days of intense observation, daily exams, and the incredulous stares of colleagues who came, one by one, to witness the impossible with their own eyes. There was no clinical explanation, no neurological damage, no major cardiac impairment. He was lucid, serene, and more alive than ever. Helena never left his side. Sometimes I found her sitting there, watching her husband sleep, with that gentle smile of someone who carries within their chest something only the heart can understand. She thanked me every day, but I always gave the same answer. "Mrs. Helena, if anyone deserves thanks here, it's you." She insisted that it was my stubbornness that brought Joan back. But deep down, I knew that my stubbornness alone wouldn't have been enough. There was something beyond, something that lingered in that room and somehow touched everyone who entered. One morning during medical rounds, João was awake, waiting for me. His eyes were different, calm, profound, as if he had seen something that we still couldn't. "Doctor," he began softly, "do you think we choose to come back?" I stayed silent for a moment. "I don't know," I replied. "I believe that sometimes life decides for us." He smiled. "Well, I think life asked me, and I said it wasn't time yet." In that moment, there was no longer any room for skepticism. The man in front of me had faced the abyss and returned with a new light in his eyes. On the day of his discharge, the entire hospital seemed to follow in silence. João rolled down the hallway in his wheelchair, waving to every nurse, every technician, every person who had witnessed that night. And everyone, without exception, stopped to greet him, not as a patient, but as a symbol of hope. Before leaving, he came up to me. "Doctor, I don't know if you believe in God, but He believes in you." Those words struck me like a gentle blow, impossible to forget. I tried to respond with something technical, rational, but couldn't. I simply shook his hand. Helena hugged me. "I'll never forget what you did," she said, crying. "And I'll never forget what you taught me," I replied. Without realizing it, that couple had given me back something. That time, routine and exhaustion had almost taken away from me. Faith in purpose, faith that medicine is more than science. It is also an act of love. Days later, I received a letter delivered at the hospital's front desk. It was from João. Inside was a simple note, written in shaky handwriting. "Doctor, every heartbeat I hear today is a reminder that life always gives a second chance. Thank you for not giving up when everyone said it was useless to continue." I folded the paper and put it in my lab coat pocket. To this day, it's still there, wrinkled, faded, but present, as a reminder that there are stories science explains and others it only records. A few months later, I saw the couple again at a Sunday Mass. Helena recognized me from afar, ran over, and introduced me to their newborn granddaughter. "Her name is Esperanza," she said, "because that's what kept us alive." And in that moment, in the middle of the church, surrounded by ordinary people, I realized that the real miracle hadn't just happened that night. It was still happening to every day in the life they rebuilt. In the days following João's discharge, the atmosphere in the hospital felt different. It wasn't something that could be measured, but it was there, a kind of reverent silence mixed with admiration. Even the most skeptical professionals, used to seeing life and death as part of routine, spoke about him in low tones, as if the name João Batista had gained a new weight. During shift changes, the same comments kept repeating. The man came back after half an hour. No after effects at all. I saw it with my own eyes. The corridors, usually filled with fatigue and haste, had taken on a new air. There was a subtle sense of hope in the air, something no one said out loud, but everyone felt. In the doctor's room, some tried to rationalize. "It might have been residual electrical activity," said one of the cardiologists reviewing the chart. "Or maybe the monitor malfunctioned," suggested another. But none of them could hold on to that explanation for long. The tests were perfect, the records synchronized, the timing of the maneuvers correct. And more than that, everyone there had felt the same shiver when his heart began to beat again. I remember one of the nurses, the youngest on the team, approaching me at the end of the shift. "Doctor, I need to tell you something," he began, visibly emotional. "What is it?" I asked. "That night changed me," he said. "Changed you?" "Udun," I asked. "I used to think we only worked with the body, but when I saw you keep going, even when everyone said to stop, I realized that we also work with the invisible." He fell silent for a few seconds before finishing. "Since that day, whenever I treat someone, I pray quietly, not out of religion, but out of respect, because now I know life is greater than what fits on a medical chart." Those words echoed in my mind for a long time, and I realized that João's miracle hadn't happened only to him. It had spread, silently but powerfully, through each one of us. Even the most experienced, those who carried skepticism as armor against pain, began to show something different, One of the hospital's oldest surgeons, known for his stern demeanor, approached me in the cafeteria. "Moreira," he said, "I heard about your case." I nodded, unsure of what to say. He was silent for a few seconds before adding, "30 years ago I saw something similar. I spent my life trying to forget it, but after what happened with you, I realized that the unexplainable isn't weakness. It's part of who we are." That conversation left a deep mark on me. In medicine, we are trained to hide emotion, to keep the distance that protects reason. But deep down, each of us carries invisible scars of everything we've seen and of everything we couldn't save. João's case touched exactly those wounds. It was as if, for a few days, everyone had been allowed to feel again. During a staff meeting, the hospital director mentioned the case without naming names, saying only, "Sometimes what keeps a hospital alive isn't the machines, but the silent faith of those who believe in the impossible." No one replied, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. That night, when I was alone on duty, I looked at the empty monitor in the room where João had been. For a few seconds, I closed my eyes and felt again that moment when the impossible became real. And I realized that somehow the entire hospital had changed, not because of medicine, but because all of us, even if we didn't admit it, had witnessed something sacred. There are nights that pass, and there are nights that stay. That night stayed. It became a dividing line in my life, between the doctor I was and the man I became after witnessing the unexplainable. For a long time, I believed that science and faith stood on opposite sides of the same bridge, that while one walked with evidence and data, the other relied on belief and intuition. But today, after everything I've lived, I understand that maybe they're not rivals. Maybe they are two different paths leading to the same truth, because what I saw in that room wasn't just a heart starting to beat again. It was the invisible power of love acting upon something medicine still can't name. And that's what I want to talk to you about. You, who are listening right now. We spend our lives trying to control everything. Time, choices, destiny. But sometimes, it's when we lose control that something greater can act. There's a silent force that moves the universe, that connects one heart to another, one voice to a body, one soul to another. And when that force is called with true faith, the impossible becomes just another step in life's path. I've seen patients who gave up too soon, and others who fought until their last breath. But I've also seen the opposite, people whose bodies had no strength left, and yet they came back. And when they did, they carried a different light in their eyes, the light of someone who has seen that there is something beyond this world. Medicine teaches us the how, but faith answers the why, and maybe the secret lies exactly where the two meet. I'm not saying we should abandon science or expect miracles every day. What I've learned is that when science reaches its limit, what sustains what remains is love. Love heals in ways we still don't know how to measure. It crosses distances, breaks boundaries, and sometimes it even brings someone back from the other side. When I look back, I realize it wasn't just João who got a second chance. I did too, a second chance to believe, to feel, to not let exhaustion turn my work into routine. Today, every time I walk into an ICU, I remember that phrase, "It's useless to continue." And I always ask myself, is it really? Because if there's one thing that night taught me, it's that as long as there is life, even if it's just a thread, a breath, a look, there's still room for the unexpected. And if you're listening to me right now, maybe you need to hear this. Don't give up. Not on yourself, not on the people you love, not on the days when everything seems lost. The miracle might not come in the form you expect, but it always comes. Sometimes it's subtle, a reverse diagnosis, a pain that suddenly fades, a word spoken at just the right time. Other times it's grand, like João's heart deciding to beat again when the whole world had already given up. I've seen death up close many times, but that night, for the first time, I saw life winning through something that wasn't in any textbook. And that's what I want to leave you with, the certainty that there is something in us that never goes out, even when everything else seems to stop, because life always finds a way to come back. When João left the hospital, he didn't just take a healed body with him. He carried the memory of a night when the impossible became real and left marks on all of us. After that case, I began to see every heartbeat differently. The sound of the monitor, once routine, became a reminder. Every beep is a victory over silence. Medicine taught me how to save lives, but that night taught me something medical school never mentioned, that sometimes saving someone also means believing for them, even when the whole world says it's useless. I could end this video with technical explanations, talk about resuscitation protocols, cite studies on post-arrest survival, or use medical terms to make the case more acceptable. But none of that would fit what happened, because what we lived in that room doesn't belong to the realm of reasoning. It belongs to the soul, and it's that soul that keeps me going. Because deep down, every patient, every look, every story is a reminder that life is a mystery, constantly reinventing itself. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you, truly, for staying with me until the end, for feeling every word, and for being willing to reflect on what science still can't measure. Now, I need to ask you for something simple, but very important. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. That helps YouTube deliver these stories to more people who need to hear that the impossible can still happen. And if this story touched you in any way, write in the comments. I believe that life always finds a way. I want to see how much faith and hope still exist out there. And I promise you, every comment counts. Because when you write, you send a message to the universe saying, I still believe. And before this video ends, I want to leave you with a thought, a question that might stay with you for a long time. What if the miracle you're waiting for isn't something that comes from outside, but something already happening within you right now? Think about it, and remember, the next video will show you another case that also defies everything we know about life. But for now, keep this story in your heart. Because one day, when someone tells you it's useless to continue, you might remember João and silently reply, no, it's not over yet.